Welcome, Mindsetters. Today we're doing part 2 of the CAPS exam questions. So, first thing we need to do is look at what is required from you from the exam. The previous session, we looked at the compulsory questions, section A. Remember, all of these notes can be downloaded. Download them, follow along with me. So, section A, all the short questions. We looked at section B. We're going to be doing more section B questions today. And we're going to be looking at section C, which are the essays. And I know you're all stressed out about that, so we'll be looking at that as well. So first off, let's carry on with section B, looking at question 5. Question 5 is business ventures. So this is going to be looking at leadership, management, investments, all of those issues. So first question. Sizwe is the manager of Best Clothing. He explains work procedures, rewards employees for excellence, and punishes them if targets aren't met. That is the statement, so let's have a look at the question. The question asks us, identify the leadership theory described above. So looking at this question, he explains work procedures as well as rewards his employees for excellence, and he punishes them if targets aren't met. And all of these keywords will lead you to know that this would be a transactional leader or transactional leadership. So it's rewards for doing well and punishment for not meeting targets, for example. The next question, look at evaluate the impact of this leadership theory on business operations. So what's important here, you would have to have got question 5.1.1 correct. So they are asking you to evaluate the impact of transactional leadership. So evaluating this would usually require you to look at the positives and negatives. So what are the positives and negatives of transactional leadership? So the first positive, it encourages employees to work hard because they will receive rewards. It also improves employees' productivity as well as their morale because they're being rewarded. Also, goals and objectives of the business will be achieved because all the employees are working towards this. And employees know what is expected of them because they are spoken to. So they get informed of what's happening in the business. So not only are they working hard, but they feel that they know what's happening in the business. Part of the positive will obviously be the negative because we're evaluating this. So the negatives would be employees can become bored because they have to follow rules and procedures and therefore have no space to be creative in the workplace. As well as a transactional leader will have to monitor the work performance of the employees to ensure that the expectations are met, and this can be time consuming. So if you're a transactional leader, it takes time. You need to follow up on your employees, make sure that they're doing what you've told them, because obviously if you're going to reward or punish in that sense, you need to make sure that your facts are straight. And the last negative with this form of leadership, some employees may be demoralized or unmotivated if they fail to reach or meet targets despite having to have to work hard. So employees that work hard and they're trying to get rewarded but aren't will most definitely be demoralized, and this will affect your how productive your employees are. And remember, a productive employee will be a happy employee, will cause you to increase your profits. So very important. The next question, it asks us to study an extract. So let's have a look at this. So study the extract below, taken from the payslip of A. Jones, an employee of ILS Stores, and answer the questions that follow. So the first thing you need to do, again, this could also be part of just looking at data and being able to interpret data. So we're looking, so A, we know it's a payslip, and let's have a look at this payslip. So on the left, it's all the income, so it's all the money coming in. So it's the gross income, housing allowance, and overtime allowance. So this is income. On the other side, it's the income tax, UIF, medical aid, retirement annuity, and legal wise. So these will be all the expenses. So just interpreting the information before you even look at the question. So let's have a look at the question. The question asks us, calculate the net salary of A. Jones for 2 marks. So what's important here, you need to know how to calculate the net salary. So first off, how to do this, you're going to go gross salary minus deductions. will provide you with the net salary. So what you'll need to do is you will have to add up all your income. So let's quickly do that together. So first off, grab your calculators. So the first would be the 14,500, which is the gross income. So that's the actual money that A. Jones received. The housing allowance, which is another 600, as well as the overtime allowance. So remember, all of these numbers, it's all the money coming in. So the gross income is 17,050 Rand. So what you're going to do for your gross salary, so it's 17,050, and remember, we're going to deduct or subtract all the deductions. And then again, so grab your calculators. For the deductions, it's going to be income tax, which is 3,625, plus the UIF, as well as the medical aid, the retirement annuity, as well as legal-wise. And all of these add up to 6,864. So what you now need to do, so you've got your gross income minus your deductions. Your deductions, as we calculated, was the 6,864. So for this person, their net salary will be 10,186. A nice, easy 2 marks. I encourage you to be able to do these questions. Just remember, even if this isn't in a table, grade 12s, you can figure out what is income and what would be a deduction. Good. Let's have a look at the next question. So name 2 deductions on the above payslips which are not compulsory. So that's very important. So you need to be able to differentiate between compulsory and non-compulsory deductions. Now, what you need to do first off is look at the payslip again, obviously, and look at what is compulsory, what is non-compulsory. And looking at the above, we will see that medical aid, retirement annuity, and legal assistance, legal-wise, is not compulsory. In other words, when A. Jones gets paid, she chooses to pay for medical aid, for the retirement annuity, and legal-wise. So none of these are compulsory. It's a choice. The next question looks at name 2 deductions above on the above payslips which are compulsory. So what does she not have a choice? What gets deducted from there? So looking back at the payslip, we know that UIF is a compulsory insurance. Remember, it's 1%, as well as the income tax, which again is compulsory and taken by SARS. So the 2 above, or the 2 compulsory pay deductions, would be the income tax and UIF. Again, 2 marks for this question, as well as 2 marks for looking at the non-compulsory. Short questions, nice questions, and again, grade 12s, these are the types of questions you need to be aware of, and just, they're free marks, essentially. The next question, we're going to be looking at what is the difference, so let's read it. Distinguish between unit trusts and fixed deposits as a form of investment in terms of, so this question is broken down, in terms of risk, so that's the first one, the risk, the investment period, the second part, as well as the return on investments. So this question is asking you 3 things, grade 12s, and you can also see by the mark allocation, which is 12, this is a big question, this is a question that popped up in a previous exam, so these big questions, again, that's not difficult, you just need to make sure that you're answering all the parts of the question. So, distinguish between the 3. So, off the bat, let's have a look. So, first off, remember, I told you number 1, you're looking at the risk. So, the risk of a unit trust, it's a low or medium risk. So, it's, remember, the concept of investment, high risk, high return, low risk, low return. So with unit trusts, the risk is low to medium, and the portfolio is managed by an expert. On the other side, the risk with a fixed deposit is low risk. Okay, low risk, it's in the bank, it will be a fixed period, and you know your investment is safe. So again, if it's low risk, it'll probably be a low return. And another part, the principal amount and interest and periods are generally fixed. So you know how long you're going to be having your money in there for the fixed deposit. The second part of this question is the period of investment. So how long? So usually with unit trusts, it's medium to long term, as well as the nice fact that unit trusts may be sold at any time. So period of investment will depend on the investor, even though it will probably be recommended to them. Fixed deposit, on the other hand, could be short, medium, or long term. So again, depending on the individual, how long they want to invest their money. Now this can vary from 8 days to a number of years. And again, the longer you would keep it, the higher your return would be, because with investments, the longer you keep it, the more return you'll get. And the last part here, and this is determined when a deposit is made and may not be changed after that, unless it is cancelled before the term expires. So if you choose, for example, on a fixed deposit to have a 3-year fixed deposit, if you take your money out before the end of those 3 years, you have not fulfilled your side of the contract or your side of the deal, which was the 3 years, so you'll probably pay penalties. Remember, this is an agreement. You leaving your money there in return for interest. The bank's side of it, they use your money to invest in other parts. So if you cancel beforehand, you will definitely pay a fine. The third part of this, it's your return on investment. For unit trusts, this can be dividends, interest, or a combination of both. And it also depends on the form of investment in which the fund was invested. So even unit trusts, you get different levels of unit trusts. And that's why it can range from low to medium risk. So it'll depend on that. And also, it'll depend on the market condition. So if the market is doing badly, your unit trust will do badly. If we look at the return on investment with a fixed deposit, it's interest only. And this interest can be capitalized, so reinvested over the period of time of investment, as well as it could be compounded, so interest could be used to earn higher returns. So the fixed deposit people, you know the calculations, compound interest. So people often like to keep money there because you earn money on the interest you've already earned. So those 3 questions, and remember, this whole question was out of 12. So grade 12, let's go to the next part of this question, or another question. It says, describe the factors that need to be considered when preparing for a presentation. So now we've moved on from looking at investments and looking at presentations. So factors looking at presentations for this section, remember, it's important to know what the factors are looking at presentations, but again, you need to be able to interpret data and interpret different information, as well as remember looking at feedback and handling of questions, for example. So this question, we're going to be looking at preparing for a presentation. This is out of 10 marks. So you know at this stage, grade 12s, this would be 5 points, and they'll count 2 marks each. So let's have a look at some of these factors. So factors when preparing for a presentation. Firstly, you have to decide on the purpose of the presentation and list the objectives. So it's important for you to literally know what you're speaking about. Next, you have to establish the main points that you're going to use to have a logical structure. So very much as you prepare for, let's say, a speech at school, you need to know what you're speaking about, and you need to set it out in such a way that it makes sense. And especially in a presentation, if you're going to present information to people, it needs to be organized, it needs to be logical. Another point to take into account, consider the background of the audience and use appropriate methods to address them. So with this point, looking at the background of the audience, are you speaking to people that are, for example, in high school, or are you speaking to people that are in their late 50s or 60s? You would have to keep that in mind with looking at the language you're using, the examples you're using, references, etc. And let's do one more. You have to visit the venue for the presentation, example, to determine what equipment is available. So when you go into a room, if it's a big room, you'll need to think about how loud you're going to be speaking. If you're going to be doing a presentation, often you'll need a PowerPoint presentation, for example. Do they have a projector? And literally go to the venue and see if they have everything you need. Because when you get there on the day, remember, you logic, you've structured this, and you also want to be familiar with the venue. So going back to that, this was worth 10 marks. And again, this is a nice logical question that you can follow through. The next question, question 5.5, it's discuss the success and failure of a private company and a partnership under the following headings. So if we look at, there are 3 headings and they're each worth 4 marks. So for this, we know, so it's a private company, that's the first form of ownership, and the second form of ownership is a partnership. And you have to discuss the success and failure. And if you want to say that in a different way, that could be what are the advantages and disadvantages. So first one, we're looking at a private company. And with a private company, and remember there were 3 questions going with this, it was capacity, taxation, and legislation. So with a private company, with a capacity, what will be success factors with the capacity? So first off, it's normally large and can have any number of owners. So they can have more than one owner, and it's become easier to establish a private company. So that will lead to the success. The next part, what would lead to the failure looking at the capacity? The large capacity of the company can also lead to its downfall, and that structures and processes may become costly. So even though an advantage of the capacity would be that you can have many people, the disadvantage would be it could affect the process, could become costly, which will obviously affect your profit margin. The next part of this question, it's taxation. So how are private companies affected, their success affected by tax? So the business pays tax on the income it's earned. So the business pays tax. Remember, it's with forms of ownership, it's about not just taxation and capacity, it's about being how liable, limited, unlimited liability, all of those issues. So, and remember, private companies also are seen as a separate individual, so a separate legal entity, and that's why the company will pay tax. The next part of the success would be profit is distributed to shareholders in the form of dividends, and then they pay a secondary tax on that. So that then, the part of that taxation becomes the responsibility of the shareholder, and that shifts away from the company, which is part of, if you're paying less tax, obviously remember looking at profit margins. Taxation and how that would affect a private company negatively. Shareholders pay secondary tax, so they need to earn enough profit to make the investment worthwhile. So often shareholders will look at how much tax do I have to pay on the dividends I've received, and is it really worth my while? Am I investing enough? Am I getting enough back to want to invest into this company? And this could affect people investing or buying shares. And if you're trying to sell shares and people aren't buying shares, again, it will affect your company. The third part here, looking at legislation. Remember, legislation would be laws affecting this. So laws that would help with the success of a private company would be, so first off, they have to comply with the Companies Act of 2008, or remember, all the Companies Act issues, if you've got old textbooks, please, grade 12s, get rid of them. If it's not part of if it's not after 2008 companies, you're going to have some of the information will be wrong. Another part of the success, they have to complete a memorandum of incorporation as well as a notice of incorporation, and payment fees need to be registered to have the company. And the biggest success factor, or what I think is an advantage of a private company, is that it's limited liability. Now remember, with limited liability, if anything goes wrong with a business, it will not affect the owner, for example, because remember that's a separate legal entity. So if the company gets sued, you're not going to lose your house, for example. It becomes the company's legal issue. Legislation and what will affect the company in a negative way. First off, it takes a long time and it's a long procedure to form a public company, so it's time consuming, as well as it can become complicated to follow the correct procedure and obtain all the legal documents. So with obtaining and making sure that you're in the correct place, remember all of these things cost money. So you would need to hire people, for example, to make sure that all your legal things are in place. And so time and money would definitely be part of the disadvantages, yeah. So that was for a private company. Remember, we're looking at a private company and a partnership. So looking at a partnership in the same way, remember the capacity, tax, and legislation. Let's have a look at how this has affected the success and failure. So for the capacity, a partnership, we'll be looking at partnerships. A partnership, the business is easy to control as it is small. Okay, so you have more control. Remember, the more control you have, theoretically, the easier it is to make sure that your company is going to do well. Another success factor for a partnership would be partners provide personal attention and dedication. Remember why? Because you're personally invested in this. This is my company and I need to make sure that it's successful so that I can make a profit. And the last success would be partners are usually active in the business. And as I said before, you're active and you're involved and you're interested because you have a personal interest in what's happening here. What could lead to the failure with capacity? First off, so there's no limit to the number of partners. So it may become complex. And again, this is why I was speaking about the 2008 Companies Act, grade 12s. With a partnership, remember, you can have from 2 to unlimited partners. And where the older information was 2 to 20, and that's not correct anymore. So keep that in mind. Another point which could lead to the failure, it's difficult to continue and grow in the long term. Because of the legal structures, etc., it does become complicated. And lastly, partners have to carry out all the business functions. So unless they hire an outside person, they have to be responsible for everything. And if you're not, for example, an accountant, making sure your books are up to date and correct could become problematic. The next section, taxation and partnerships. So what helps with the success of a partnership? Firstly, the business does not pay any tax. Remember, because a partnership, this form of ownership, the partners are the business. It's like a sole trader. You are your business. And another advantage or another success would be that partners are each responsible for paying their own tax and profits made in a personal capacity. So when the business makes a profit, you make a profit, so you pay tax. So it's a once-off tax. What could lead to the failure of a partnership would be if the profits get too big, many end up paying high tax in a personal capacity. So there could be a problem where if you're making a lot of money, you're paying a lot of tax. So yes, that is a disadvantage, but I suppose if you think about it logically, you want your company to make a lot of money, and that will then lead you to have to think about, is this form of ownership the correct form of ownership if you are not getting ahead with tax. And the last part here, legislation, so laws that affect partnerships. What will help with the success of a partnership? First off, there is no registration needed. So partnerships don't have to spend time and money to register their business, which will help. And also, it's a simple partnership agreement is needed between partnerships. So again, it's not time consuming, it's not a lot of documentation, so that will help with the success of the business or the partnership. What could affect the failure or the failure with legislation and partnerships? First off, it's unlimited liability. So unlimited liability, if something happens to your business, it theoretically happens to you. Because as, for example, a public company has a separate legal entity, a partnership has no separate legal entity, so it's unlimited liability. Another factor that could lead to the failure, personal debts and business debts become one. So if the business is doing badly and you as an individual are doing badly financially, it will all add up to a lot of financial problems and debt. And lastly, private assets could be sold off to pay for the debts of the business. So with the unlimited liability, if the company is doing badly and you need to pay creditors and you do not have money in your company, you could have to end up having to sell something that you own, so your car, your house, etc., to pay for the debts. And again, this all gets linked back to the unlimited liability as well as being seen as a separate legal entity. So that was a long question. And again, grade 12s, you've been doing this forms of ownership for a long time, so it's important that you keep that in mind. And it's also important with forms of ownership that you look at all the forms of ownership, not just the four main ones. Look at other forms, non-profit organizations, those forms of ownership as well. Let's do the next question. So question 5, we're going back to investments, and this is looking at, well, before I jump the gun, let's have a look at the question, and then we'll discuss it. So the question is asking, or the statement, so 5.6, you have to read the statement. So there is a shop in the center of Johannesburg, and it was damaged by a fire. Now the shop was insured for 250,000 Rand, and the damage that was caused was 45,000 Rand. And another important part here, the building was valued at 350,000 Rand. So we've read the statement, so we can immediately see this is an insurance question. And off the top of your head, you'll see that the shop was insured for 250, it was valued at 350,000 Rand. And this now will show us that this is an underinsurance issue, as well as just an insurance issue because there was a fire. So the first question there, explain the clause that is applicable to the above scenario. So the clause, remember with insurance, you get different types of clauses. So in this scenario, it is the average clause. Why is it the average clause? This applies when the goods or property is underinsured and the insurance company will not pay out the full amount of the loss. So with the average clause, it's literally that. This building was insured for 250,000 Rand, but its actual value was 350,000 Rand. So the business that had the fire damage chose to pay less insurance because it's cheaper for them, but then you'll see how this affects their payout because of the underinsurance. So the next question, and this is for 6 marks, grade 12s, calculate the amount of money that will be paid for the fire damage and show all calculations. Now, for underinsurance, there's a specific formula that will help you do this. Let me quickly write the formula down, and then we'll do this together. So it is the insured amount divided by the market value times by the damage. And so with the formula, the nice thing is, you just have to go back to the scenario and just fill in the information because you know the formula. So let's do the first part here, the insured amount and the market value. So we can see the insured amount was the 250,000 and the market value was 350,000 Rand. So it'll be 250,000 Rand divided by 350,000 Rand times by the damage, and remember the damage was 45,000 Rand, so times by 45,000 Rand, and if we get the calculator out quickly, so it's going to be 250,000 divided by 350,000 times by 45,000, remember which was the damage, it's going to give you 32,142.85. Usually what you'll do in this case, you will round it up to the 2 decimals after that. So let's write this in quickly. So what they will be paid out is 32,142 and 86 cents. Remember, I rounded that. And this was 6 marks. It's an easy calculation in the sense that if you know the formula, you'll know the answer because you can just fill in the information from the facts given to you. And the last question that we're going to be looking at now is discuss the term overinsurance. So we've looked at underinsurance, where this building was insured for 250,000. It was only worth, well, it was worth 350,000. And because they're underinsured, it affected their payout after there was damage caused to the property. So on that side, on the other side, you get the term overinsurance. So what is overinsurance? So overinsurance is when you insure goods or property for an amount more than its actual market value. So an example, would then, if we switch it around, if they insured the building for 350,000 Rand, but it was only worth 250,000 Rand. So they insure it for more than its market value. That's overinsurance. And what's applicable here, although they are paying more money on a monthly basis for the premiums, they won't receive a larger payout. So they won't receive more than the actual market value. So what often happens with overinsurance, the company could choose to reinstate it. So they'll say, we will rebuild the building for you, valued at the actual amount. So overinsurance becomes a problem in that even though people are paying more for their premiums, they won't get more out of it. And that's part of the principle of insurance, that you get back to the position you were before the accident or damage was occurred. So nobody should benefit from insurance. It's about placing you where you were before the incident occurred. So have a quick break, grade 12s, and we'll get back with another question. We've just completed parts of section B, and we're going to move on to section C. Remember, section C is the essay section, and you get to choose 2 out of 4 of the essay questions given to you in your question paper. We're going to be looking at some of these questions, or some essays. So the first essay I've selected, I want to show you how to plan an essay. So as you plan any other essay, it's important for you to plan a business essay. So for question 9, let's have a look at how to plan an essay. So question 9, it gives us a statement. So the King's Code provides a framework to corporate governance for the best business practices. Business ethics and professional conduct are guided by this code. So that's the statement. Remember, mostly with essays, they're going to give you a statement to give you sort of an idea of where they're going with the essay, and then they're going to ask you the question. So the question in this case is distinguish with examples between professional behavior and unprofessional behavior. Continues to ask, explain possible reasons why prices in rural areas, and unfair advertising are regarded as unethical business practices. And the last part of this question, discuss ways in which professional, responsible, ethical, and effective business practices should be conducted. So this essay is asking you 3 separate things. So keeping this in mind with your planning. So this is the first part. So they're asking you to distinguish between professional and unprofessional. The second part they're asking you is to explain reasons why prices in rural areas and unfair advertising is regarded as unethical. And the third part of this question, they're asking you to discuss professional, responsible, and ethical business practices. So when planning this essay, let's have a look. So first off, grade 12s, remember your heading. And remember, your heading would be part of your lasso mark. So in this case, your heading could be anything related to ethics. So any heading you choose, keep it short, keep it simple. Then let's have a look. So you're going to have, first off, remember your introduction. And in your introduction, there's going to be 2 bullet points. So it's going to be 2 times 1. So 2 times 1, so you're going to be writing 2 things. We're going to be looking at an introduction and conclusion in a bit more detail in the next essay. Then keeping this in mind, remember your conclusion is 1 times 2. So it's 1 mark, so 1 point in your conclusion. But what I want to look at now is looking at how to answer your body, because often you writing an exam, a person gets distracted. How much do I write underneath each heading? And let me help to show you how to do this in a nice, easy way. So start off. So we know this is your body. And we know, because we've identified it, that there are 3 parts to this essay. So the first part, we're looking at professional and unprofessional. So I'm just going to write professional and unprofessional there. We know the second part of this essay is looking at the pricing of goods in rural areas, as well as the unfair advertising. And it's important to write these headings down so that you remember what your subheadings are going to be. So unfair advertising, the 1 point, and your third subheading, grade 12s, is going to look at the professional, so that's your third one, the professional responsible practices. So you have your 3 subheadings, so label that number 2. And now it's the tricky part, grade 12s. This is the part where how much do I write underneath each of these? So before we even get to the subheadings, to remind you that your body consists out of 28 marks. So in theory, that will mean you need to write plus minus 14 points. So keeping these 14 points in mind and keeping in mind the headings we have and what you need to write underneath each of these, let's have a look at how to break down these 14 points. So first off, we're going to start with our first subheading, which was the professional and unprofessional. And remember, part of this is that you need to know exactly what is part of professional and unprofessional. So part of professional and unprofessional, the aspects would include issues of respect, integrity, as well as competency. So those are the three things that they have there. So there are many more grade 12s, but for this, let's use the first 3. So respect, integrity, and competency. So within this now, we know we need to write 3 things. And if we look at the actual question, grade 12, it's asking us to distinguish with examples between professional and unprofessional. So how do we figure out how much to write there? So we know we need to name it, so we've already named it. And then you need to now discuss this from a professional and an unprofessional aspect, using these as your main points to discuss it from there. So for professional and unprofessional, this will end up being 6 times 2, which will give you 12 marks. And how did why 6? Because we've got these 3, and we are discussing professional and unprofessional with each of them. The next subheading would be the pricing of goods in rural areas and unfair advertising. And with this is quite simple, in that there aren't too many subheadings for this. So for this, in your planning, you will write, so it'll be times 2 relating to the rural areas. So 2 points for this, and then 2 points for the unfair advertising. So that in total will then be the 4 times 2, which will give you 8. So do you see how after each section I stop and I look at how many points, what are the marks worth for that in my planning, so that I know that I get to my total of the 28 marks and the 14 points. And lastly, looking at the third subheading, which was the professional, let's have a look, discuss ways in which professional, responsible, and ethical and effective business practices should be conducted. How much do I need to write there? Well, there's 2 ways you can do this. So you already know that you've allocated 6 points to this subheading. You know that you've given 4 to this, so that's going to give you 10. So just doing a little calculation, you'll now know the 14 minus the 10 you've already done will give you the 4 remaining points that you need to write. So under the professional and responsible, this will be times 4. So in other words, grade 12s, you will have the 4 points times 2, which will give you 8. And when you add these all together, you'll get your total of 28 marks. So just to give you a little bit more on that last one, so the professional and responsible, 4 points to keep in mind there. This would be, for example, just to give you one example, would be fair payment of wages. And then you will discuss the fair payment of wages and then the 3 other remaining points. with this, grade 12s, so what I want you to see from this is that when you do your essay, so you know your introduction, you know what you need to do in your conclusion, but looking at your body and looking at this breakdown of looking at the 28 marks and the 14 points and using the information they've given you. I hope that's helped with your planning, and do this with every essay, grade 12s, because it really will help you to work out your body and your timing. And speaking about timing, keep in mind that you only have 30 minutes to do each of these essays. So part of that 30 minutes should be your planning. So try and get your planning done not as quickly as possible, but leave yourself enough time to do the actual essay. Now, the next essay we're going to be looking at, which is question 10, is I want to look at helping you to do an introduction and a conclusion. Often grade 12s, people or learners tell me that they battle to write an introduction and a conclusion. And my advice there off the bat is always make sure that you keep it relevant and use facts, definitions, and you can also always use South Africa as an example. So everything we do, you can relate back to it. So if we're speaking to unemployment, you can speak about unemployment in South Africa in your conclusion as well, for example. So let's have a look how to do this with question 10. So question 10, remember the statement first. So Joe is a hardworking, self-employed builder. His business is experiencing financial problems, and Joe buys building materials from suppliers who deliver poor quality products. Joe is struggling to manage both his business and his building projects. He wants to tender for large building contracts in order to create more jobs and expand his business. So off the bat again, you know what we're looking at, where this is going. So we know this is a person struggling. It's a person who wants to improve their business. So keep that in mind. It will help you with your introduction. Now, the actual question. So advise Joe on how to become a successful entrepreneur so that he can expand his business. Looking at planning, we can even just label that number 1. So that's the first part. Advise Joe on how he can be a successful entrepreneur. And part of this, you must include the following aspects in your answer. So this is your answer over there. So explain 5 entrepreneurial qualities in order for Joe to be successful. Also, you can just label that. Identify and discuss possible problem areas in Joe's business as indicated in the case study, as well as suggest recommendations for each problem area that is identified. And there's another part to this essay, grade 12s. Comment on the sustainability and profitability of the business with regards to Joe's plans to apply for the tender. So they've given us the case study. They've told us what they want us to answer in this essay. Let's have a look at how to do this introduction. So because they've given us a case study using Joe as an example, you have to use Joe in your essay, grade 12s. It's very important. So in your introduction, and remember your introduction in general, well, not in general, your introduction will be 2 times 1. So 2 points with 1 mark each. So in the introduction, what they've used here, Joe's hardworking and uses all his energy to complete a job. It's general, but it's almost a paraphrase of what they've said, but it's not repeating it. That's very important, grade 12s. Don't repeat a question, give a statement or a fact. Also, he only works for himself, so he's motivated to be successful. Another point, thorough knowledge of the operations of the business will lead to sustainability and profitability. And lastly, good entrepreneurial characteristics and well-organized managed business will be successful and sustainable. So you'll see in this introduction, they're commenting on what's happening. Yeah, you could also have gone, besides using Joe, you could have used the definition of what is entrepreneurship and how this will affect, so what is entrepreneurship, and then you can discuss Joe as well. So for your introduction, 2 marks for 2 sentences. Then for your conclusion, grade 12s, let's have a look at that. And for your conclusion, if you remember, it's 1 times 2. So it's 1 times 2. And what could you have said in your conclusion for this? So Joe must manage his business more effectively so that they can be able to finish the projects on time. as well as Joe will improve his sustainability and profitability of the business if he organizes his projects effectively to take on more contracts. So have a quick break, grade 12s, and we'll get back with another question. What I want to do now is look at an entire essay. So we're going to go to question 11 and look at body or introduction, body, and conclusion. Question 11, and remember again, I just want to remind you, for your essays grade 12s, you're doing 2 out of 4. So you're choosing what you're doing, you're choosing your strength. Question 11, it's the statement. It's you are the financial advisor who must assist a client who wants to invest 5 million rand for 3 years in one of the following investment options. So the first investment option is a fixed deposit in a bank account for 3 years at simple interest of 8.5% per year. The second option, shares in a well-known listed company at 5 Rand per share, and dividends of 95 cents per share have been paid out in the past 2 years. The directors have indicated that this amount will not change in the next 3 years. So you guaranteed that 95 cents dividends per share. And the third option is the governmental retail bonds for 3 years at 8% per year compounded annually. And the last investment option is a small shopping center with 10 shopping outlets, and then rent per unit will be fixed at 60,000 Rand a year for the next 3 years. So there are a lot of, we've just read it a lot, guys, so often what's good, just go back. So, and you are the financial advisor and you have to help somebody choose one of the following investments. So we've seen there are 4 different investment options here. Let's go look at the actual question in more detail. So remember, you were asked to advise. So support your customer to make the best investment decision by. So now they are literally asking you or telling you what your subheadings are going to be. So your first subheading, explaining each investment option listed above. So explaining each of those 4. So from the fixed deposit down to the building being rented out. The next part of this question, describing the risk involved in each of the options, so low risk, high risk. Thirdly, calculating the return on each investment and show your calculations clearly. So they're asking you to do return on investment for the third part. And lastly, they are asking you recommend the best investment option for your client and motivate your recommendation. For the fourth point here, grade 12s, you would obviously have to do all those 3 for all 4 of them before you can provide your recommendation. And your recommendation will be proven through what you've done through your calculations and shown in your return on investment. So for the first part here, let's assume we've done most of the planning and you've sat there, you've looked at what is your heading, you've planned out your body. Remember, keeping in mind your 14 points, the 28 marks, your introduction and conclusion. And don't forget lasso, remember those 8 marks, but that's not that you'll get through the essay you've done. So let's start with the introduction. And remember, introductions, it's not a set thing. You have freedom of how you want to do the introduction in that what you're going to write, but keep in mind the case study and keep in mind the question. And what I mean with the freedom is these answers aren't set in stone necessarily for the introduction. Remember, you can use definitions, you can use facts. So this introduction. So the customer or investor must seek advice on various investment options in order to make an informed investment decision. So the question was, advise them on the best. So the part of the introduction would be saying you're helping them seek advice. Next, an investor should consider the advantages and disadvantages of each form of investment and should therefore understand the characteristics of each form of investment. So making the client aware that there are different advantages and disadvantages. Another part of the introduction, you could have said financial advisor should consider the risk involved in the different forms of investments and looking at high risk and low risk. So we've done our introduction, and remember you need to have your heading. What I want to do with you now, grade 12s, we're going to look at going through one of these aspects in the body in completion so that you have an idea of the subheadings for each of them. So the one I've picked for you is we can do a fixed deposit. So remember, they've asked us 4 separate things, and you need to answer that for each 4 of them. So let's do fixed deposits in detail. So with the fixed deposit, first off, we're going to look at just the general characteristics. So it's money is deposited in a bank account for a predetermined period at a fixed interest rate. So we were saying, what is a fixed deposit? Next, fixed deposits may not outperform the effect of inflation over a long period. So this is giving an advantage and a disadvantage. So the advantage would be it's predetermined, it's a fixed interest rate, so that's the advantage. The disadvantage would be it might not stay in line with inflation, because remember, it all depends on the economy. Another part of this fixed deposit, remember they asked us, another question of those 4 was, what are the risks involved of a fixed deposit? So the risk is very low, as the investor will receive his or her investment when the fixed deposit matures and the term expires. So remember, this is low risk, but it will probably be low reward. So that was the second part of those 4 things they were asking us. Then what is the return on investment? So it's not very high compared to other types of investment, and interest may be calculated at a single or compound calculation, so the interest may be paid out annually or capitalized and reinvested. So the return on investment, what you're answering under this part, specifically for the fixed deposit, is looking at if it's high or low risk, the return on that, and also looking at the fact that it could be compound or simple interest on this. And another part of this question, remember, they asked you to calculate the rate of return. And the calculation here, they've calculated the fixed deposit, and they've used one of the formulas for the rate of return. And on a fixed deposit, remember, it's usually compounded, so it'll be a compound interest calculation. Now, I want to just take your focus back to the initial question, because remember I told you I'm only going to do one in a lot of detail with you. So for this essay, you would have had to have done this for 5 of them. So let's just quickly highlight. So we did the fixed deposit, then you would have to do the same with the shares, as well as government retail bonds, as well as looking at a small shopping center. And like I showed you, you have to do each one of those 4 steps. Well, these 3, remember, because we can only do the recommendation right at the end. So in this essay, you would have done that from fixed deposit all the way down to the shopping center. And then let's have a quick look at how we're going to do this in the conclusion. The conclusion now, so you've done your introduction, you've done your body, conclusion. So when choosing the best investment option, all possible information about different options should be considered, as large amounts are set at stake and will influence the future of the investor positively or negatively. And an informed choice of an investment is a wise choice that will only be to the benefit of the investor. So again, in the conclusion, you could have taken this back to obviously the case study, but you could also have used South Africa as an example. Grade 12s, we've looked at a number of essays. Remember, get these notes, read through your notes. Good luck with the exams.